Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K through 12 school shooting database. My guest today is Officer Seth Capps. He is the Guardian Program Director in Mineola ISD. And don't be confused when you hear Guardian Program. This is not Guardian Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from episode 33 with the founder, Ben Kovacs. This is Guardians in Schools in Texas. So, Officer Capps, thank you so much for coming to this. Wait a second, we got an emergency in the operations center right now.
You're good. You're good. They'll go on to the next officer available. So we're good to go. Sorry about that.
Oh, not a problem at all. I mean, this is the real world of school safety. Is that it is a 24/7 job, as I talked about with Dr. Beth Sandberg from Pennsylvania SROs a couple months ago. Your phone is going to ring probably 5 times during this interview.
Oh, absolutely.
All night long.
Absolutely. It's every one of our officers, we operate take-home vehicles. We don't really operate an on-call schedule, but it's the first available one that we have jumps on it right away, and then we roll from there. So, hey, Miss Wendell, if you could, would you give Chief a call or roll over to Officer Hurst? Thank you.
So before you got into the 24/7 world of school policing, being in Mineola ISD, about 90 minutes east of Dallas, You're originally from Texas, right?
Yes. I actually grew up in a town just south of here, about 10 minutes south of here, which is where my wife and I live now with our kids. We've got 6 kids at home. And a little town called Lindale, Texas. It's right off of Interstate 20. Started school there. About 4th grade, we moved to Central Texas. I spent most of my school years in Central Texas until about my junior year in high school. Junior year in high school, we moved back to East Texas and then graduated here in East Texas, went to college at...
Before you get to college, what size schools were those like? Because, I mean, every time I've been to Texas and driven around Texas, it's unbelievable how big it is. But you also have small towns. You've got some huge metropolitan areas. You've got a lot of kind of suburbs in between. What size schools were these, and what size kind of communities were you growing up in?
Absolutely. So it's really hard for people who have never visited Texas to truly fathom what the environment is like down here. Most people see one of two things. They either see the tiny K-12 school in small town Texas where kindergarten through 12th grade is all in one building and everybody knows everybody, and potlucks on Sunday and Friday night football games where everybody's over at Billy Joe's house after, and so on and so forth. Or you see the Dallas-Fort Worth, the Houston, Austin area, El Paso mega schools where you have, in some circumstances, entire states' populations that attend a high school. You take some of the smaller New England states or something like that, their whole population could attend some of these high schools and probably have more attendance there in the school than they do in that state. So there's such a vast array, if you would, of possibilities in Texas to what your experience could be. So the funny thing, though, is the small town school and the mega school are actually the furthest ends of the spectrum for what the majority of the state holds. So what I grew up in is what we would call the majority stakeholder in education, which is about your 3A, 4A school. So anywhere we classify our schools in a system, in A system. So you've got a 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A. Those 3A, 4A schools are what make up the majority of your schools. So a 3A school, which is what I work in now, around 2,000 students and staff total, with a high school population of about 500 students. And then your 4A schools, that jumps up to about, I believe, 1,500 students in the high school roughly or might be just at 1,000. I'd have to double check on that because they change it pretty constantly too. So we're constantly looking to see what the numbers are going to be and then how they're going to recategorize and all of those things. but that's around what you're usually looking at. So the school that I went to in Central Texas was a larger 3A school at the time, which now would be considered a 4A school, since they've reclassed and so on and so forth. I had about just under 300 kids in my graduating class, which would put just over about 1,200 ish in the high school total at the
And
time.
why I get into that minutia is there are two states that really drive a lot of public education policy across the country. Florida, where I live, has 6 of the 10 biggest school districts in the country. And then Texas has the most individual K through 12 school buildings of any state in the country. So when a program comes out of Texas or Florida, whether it's curriculum, whether it's athletics, extracurricular, or a safety or security program, it's something that if it meets all of the needs of different schools within that state, it's probably going to be able to replicate to all of the other possible configurations of schools in different parts of the country. So I think it's interesting as we're going to get into talking about the Guardian program that you're running there, the way that some of the lessons from your different sized schools, different sized communities in Texas, you have one state policy that kind of dictates what everybody needs to make work within those constraints. So before I cut you off there, so you were talking about you went on to college and then on to the Marine Corps after that.
I did. I went to college for about a year. I had no interest in the time at going to college. I went because I had basically been begged to by a parent. Wanted to go into the military right out of high school. Of course, we're talking mid late 2000s. So the war on terror is hot and heavy. I'm a generation that remembers 9/11. I remember Columbine. I remember everything during the late 90s and early 2000s that was going on, all the play back and forth with Iran, all the WMD talk, everything else. And by the time I got to the point where I was able to go, I had done years and years of research into all of those things and thought I was a proud American. And more than anything else, I was just an angry teenager. I needed somewhere to let that anger out. And the Marine Corps happens to let you do that professionally without getting in trouble. So I decided that was a good place to be. Looking back, we can always double guess our decisions. I'm glad that I joined the military. I'm proud of my service, but I don't consider it to be one of those things that makes me who I am now. It led me on the path to where I am now because it gave me a love for service and for helping others and protecting. And I think that some of those skills I learned there have made me a better protector. But I don't know that it's the end all be all. I'm very proud of it though. So did my time there. Came back after just 4 years in. I went into the inactive reserves and went back to school. Finished an associate's degree at this point because I had already signed for a special forces contract in the Army to do a transfer of service at the time. Got excited about that. So I was looking at a career in the military at that point and thinking that's what I was going to go back into. So I wanted to get my associates with the hopes of attending the Army War College later on and possibly running a team of my own and all of those things. And so I finished my associates, got my orders, went back into the service, went back into the Army, and less than 90 days in, I'd found out I had a eye disease that I had never heard of before. And at the time, we're talking 14 time frame. So President Obama has started the drawdown forces at the time. We're pulling out of Afghanistan. The forces get a huge cut. I think the Marine Corps, we were at our height, we were at 202,000 and got the order to get down to 167,000 within the year. And the Army had similar cuts coming down. So pretty much anything that they could, cut through the red tape on to cut the numbers down, they were doing. So I got discharged. From the time I found out I had something wrong with my eyes to the time I got discharged, I think was less than like 20 days. It was insane. So here I was standing back in East Texas with no clue what to do with my life, having prepared for a long career in the military, and kind of devoted to that, and wasn't really sure where to go from there. So, um, believe it or not, got into construction. I did that for a few years before I realized that was just soul crushing. The service aspect is what really drew me back to this world. I didn't have a problem with the work or the job. I was actually really good at it. I promoted quickly in the company I was in. I was running different job sites all over the country. I had projects in multiple states, multi-million-dollar projects that I was in charge of from start to finish. And it was very easy after coming from a military background. It was just simple organization and making sure people showed up on time and staying on schedule and under budget. Wasn't really hard to do coming from the Marine Corps because we never had a budget anyway. So I was successful at that, but I got really pinned down on the concept that I was basically killing myself physically and emotionally, draining myself to do nothing but put more money in the pockets of people who already had deep enough pockets as it was. And there was no good being done by it. It was just for money. And that never settled well with me. I know we need money to survive, but it didn't sit right. I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life at the time, and was completely just crushed in my soul for what was going on. I was watching the nature of what was going on in the world, and it was just going from bad to worse. And we were starting to fight amongst ourselves again as a country. And I didn't see much of that while I was in the military and gone. We thought we knew what we were fighting for, and then you come home and we're just in this turmoil as a country. Citizens going against each other again. All of a sudden, race is a huge issue that everyone is throwing out again. The schools are becoming, being attacked left and right. And I didn't know what was going on. So I got a chance to get into the firearms industry as a consultant. I had several different companies reach out to me, and I started consulting there and worked for a few different training companies that trained for the DoD and just private sector, tactical training, marksmanship training, security training, things like that. Ended up moving back to East Texas with my wife. We had been living out in Arizona at the time. We had our second child, and we decided to move back to East Texas because we wanted to raise our kid in the kind of same area we grew up in and have that same feel. Of course, it's nothing like when we grew up. There's thousands and thousands more people here now, and the wide open spaces that were here when we were younger now have a lot of shopping malls and parking lots on them. But it's still a much better feel, and it's home. So that's what brought us back here.
And then how is it that you found your way into patrol policing from there? Because it sounds like you had kind of a varied set of experiences out of the military. What about it grabbed you in the recruitment into kind of municipal patrol policing?
David, I'll tell you, it was really a simple solution. Having been in the infantry and combat arms my entire time in the military, I was qualified to do a lot of nothing in the civilian world, other than what I was doing, which was training other trigger pullers how to do that. That unfortunately, the reason we moved back to East Texas was to find some stability. And what I was doing at the time kept me on the road about 6 weeks out of 5 every month. So that was a no-go as far as being a good dad. So when we came back to East Texas and start looking at jobs, one of the most stable that I could think of was being a police officer, at least the ones that I was qualified for. It was, shift work. It was set schedule. It was, you kind of knew what you were getting into. And luckily at the time, they had just decided that the GI Bill could cover vocational skill set applications such as the police academy. And there was a local college here in Kilgore, Texas, that houses the East Texas Police Academy that was willing to honor that. And they had a night academy. So I continued as consulting during the day and taught some some classes locally, and then I went to the
And
police
for our
academy at night.
audience, yeah, for our audience with people, all over the country and people that are, some are very familiar with law enforcement, some are not. I think it's important to note that it's really different what a police academy is in different jurisdictions. In
Hmm.
some places, like the Maryland State Police, there is a residential training program where you apply into the department, you get accepted to the department, and then you go and live at the Maryland State Police barracks for a certain amount of time. And that organization pays for all of your training, and you come out the other end as an officer in that department. There's another kind of more 9 to 5 configuration that, what a lot
Hmm.
of your large city and suburban departments have, where you'll apply in, you're accepted, then you go to a police academy that's run by that jurisdiction. You go there roughly, 7 to 5 every day. And after 6 months or 9 months, you become an officer. But at lots of, especially smaller communities in the country, a person themselves goes to an associate or a bachelor's or a vocational program where that is an accredited police training program. And once you have a degree or a certificate from that, then you take that certificate to a department and you meet the qualifications where then you can apply. And I think it's just important for people to realize how different, even within the United States, that the pathway to being a police officer can be.
Oh, very different. And I know we're going to dig into more of that here in a minute when we start talking about schools and the application of the roles of these school-based law enforcement officers and SROs. And I mean, a lot of people don't even know the difference in what a school-based law enforcement officer or an SRO is, and that there is actually a difference. But we'll talk about that more here in a second. The thing with Texas is, so we have a little bit of every one of those that you just mentioned as far as academies go. Our state level law enforcement academies, like your DPS troopers, your game wardens, things like that. Those are 6 month live-in academies. They come down, live in a barracks, and like you were talking about, and it's very paramilitaristic in nature. All of policing is paramilitaristic in nature to some extent. And then that comes all the way down to an academy like I attended, which was through a vocational uh, venue. It was taught at a local sheriff's office by adjunct instructors who were teaching for the college. They're on the job experts. These guys had spent years and years and were either lead investigators or somewhere. One of my instructors was actually a Texas Ranger that worked in the district, so obviously an expert in his field. Um, and they would come in at night, and it was all everybody in there was either working full time for the jail there in that county and trying to get their peace officer certificate on top of being a jailer, or it was guys like me who were coming into a second career later in life. There were two other former military guys in there that were kind of doing the same thing. And it was more big boy rules. We didn't have someone coming down on us every morning, making sure we were doing push-ups and PT and things like that. But we were still required to meet the standards and show up for PT testing when it was time, and so on and so forth. We were there to do that, but it was just an understood, you're going to do this on your own because you have to, or you're not going to make it, and they would cut you if you didn't. So well, I think we started with about 12 folks, and we graduated 8 or 9. I can't remember, but it was nice in that regard, and that also gave our instructors the ability to get a little more real with us in the on the job type of training when we start talking about topics in law enforcement. So as opposed to just talking about arrest, search, and seizure, they would go pull guys out of the jail, trustees, and they'd bring them out and set up mock traffic stops, and they'd put us through it and tell these trustees, who some of them were in for murder, some were in for this, but had developed a relationship with these guys and truly wanted to help us. They'd tell them, hey, treat them like you would on the road if they stopped you and you were with some of your other guys that were colored up, and how would you treat these young officers. And so that I'll never forget having searched one of them, and I got done and turned my back, and I felt something poke me, and I turned around and he had a knife in his hand. And he said, "Why didn't you find this?" And I was like, well, where did you have it? And he showed me where he had it. And I was like, how I didn't even, he said, you got to check me. You got to check every inch, man. He said, because if you don't, and I'm on the street, I will kill you. That's how we work in these gangs. That's how we work in this. That's how, and they gave us a realistic aspect of outside of the bookwork, the reality of what the job holds. And I'm not sure that you can even get that in some of these live-in academies and things like that. It was very beneficial, I believe, on for me anyway, to get a almost deployment level reality of what the job held right then and there, and it gave me an outlook going forward, um, of being able to grasp the reality of it very early on, getting into this, and which I liked. I enjoyed that. Um, I liked being able to bring that to law enforcement, getting to deal with younger officers, because I was 30 years old before I became a licensed peace officer in Texas. So I had a lot more life under my belt than most of these guys do. Um, you get some of these guys coming into policing at 21 years old, and all they know is they just got out of their mom's basement. They're just excited to have their first apartment and this and that. And it can be really hard to employ emotional tactics like empathy when you're dealing with suspects that may or may not have committed a crime. Um, Even making the differentiation in have they actually committed a crime, or are they just a suspect? And I can't hold any judgment to that one way or the other until I determine what the elements of that possible crime are, and not jumping the gun and treating them like a criminal before you've done that.
And those are probably lessons from, your experience overseas, and, uh, being in your 30s as you started policing, that are really important to take into schools. Because if a kid, from elementary school or middle school or high school is having an interaction with a police officer inside of a school, that officer really needs to know how the tone of that interaction needs to go. Because if you put somebody into feeling like they're being turned into a criminal, that's going to change the entire posture of how that student not only views you in the interaction or the type of information that they might give you. Maybe you're just trying to get information about a threat, but now they feel that they're being targeted or that they're in trouble. That can taint that interaction. And then it could also change the way that they view police officers for the rest of their life based on that, experience in grade school.
Absolutely. We hold such a high responsibility in school districts, whether you're an SRO that's on loan from a local either municipality or county jurisdiction, or a school-based law enforcement officer that's working for an ISD police department, or even just working off-duty security for a school as an officer that's being employed to watch a prom dance or a sporting event. What you have to understand is one of the few places that you'll ever work in law enforcement, you have individuals that are as close to a clean slate image of police that you're going to get. And that is, all they know of police is what they've either seen on TV or heard their parents talk about, because they haven't dealt with us yet. They don't know anything other than that. So the interpersonal relationships that you build with these students, that the example that you set for them, and how you carry yourself, and how you respond to situations, and especially reactions, right? Because that's what everybody sees. They don't see the preparation, they don't see the planning, they don't see the day in, the day out. What do they see? They see our response, they see our reaction to certain things, like when they start to try to push your buttons and see how far you can go. And if you're one of those guys that's a younger guy that's going to blow your lid and start immediately hollering and screaming commands at these kids and things like that, guess what? All respect that you could have earned from these guys is immediately gone. All they're going to think about is you being some hothead. Now they know they can push your buttons and cause a big scene, and probably get out of class if they get you to blow your lid, right? So that's out of the picture. Vice versa, what this job has looked like for so many years. And I know in one of the podcasts you recently did, you guys were talking about was that ROD job, right? That retired on duty job where the guy who had a couple years left and had been doing this for 45 years and could barely get in and out of a patrol car is now walking around in khaki shirts and a polo and or khaki pants and a polo with a pea shooter on his hip. And that was what we called our active deterrent in a school. And he doesn't even want to talk to these kids. He's on his second set of grandkids and his kids are long gone and he's dealing with his third ex-wife and you know that also is not the one that you want inside a school. The way that we look at it now and kind of the culture that's starting to take hold, it's starting to take hold. It's not there yet. I would like to see the shift is what we've talked about before, and that being our schools housing our most precious cargo in our communities. Okay, the most precious thing that we could ever think about in our community. If your community does not take care of its youth, then what future does your community have? Those are the individuals, just like I did, coming back to my community, having left. I mean, I've traveled the world twice, 2-3 times over, been to multiple countries. I've been to nearly every state in the union. Lived in Hawaii. I've lived in Washington, D.C. I've lived in California. I've been overseas. I've been back. And guess what? When I had kids and started my family, where did I go? I came home to my community. Now, later in the middle of my life, when I'm at my peak for being able to serve, where am I serving? I'm serving my community. I'm giving back to my community. My children have now become the youth and the future of my community where I grew up.
And
Right?
I think that that's something that also can be different in Texas or different in smaller communities that are on kind of the outer edges of suburbs compared to some of your large urban cities or your large suburban departments, is in a lot of cases, public safety is priced out of the communities that they work in. So, I mean, where I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, the paid firefighters and police officers that work in Washington, D.C. or work in the suburbs immediately around the city live in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and Delaware and Southern Virginia because people can't afford to actually live in the communities that they work in. And I think that that's one of the big divisions that you have within public safety, whether it's police, fire, or EMS, is your level of compassion towards the citizens that you have interaction with are going to be different if they're actually your neighbors versus a place that you're driving 100 miles to work your 24-hour shift or work your overtime weekend in. That those are not people that you necessarily see reflecting your own self, your values. Maybe you have some resentments even that you're not able to live in that place and you have to commute so long to get there. So I think especially once you start talking about school policing, I assume that, you mentioned kids a couple times, that your kids and their friends and your nephews and neighbors and everyone else are the kids within the schools that your department's serving.
Oh, absolutely. And even, I mean, you think about it, my kids actually don't even attend the district that I work for. But our school district, just because of the way school district lines are, and they have to attend where we live, but it's their school is only 7 miles from here, as the crow flies. If I turn my lights and sirens on, I can be there in about 5 or 6 minutes if I needed to where my kids
maybe a little quicker,
maybe a little bit quicker, but in wanton regard and due regard for public safety, the way I always drive. That would be how I got there, wink, wink. But their school district, has an ISD police department as well. And I'm friends with all of those guys. And guess what? We have conversations all the time about school safety things that we're doing. Hey, are you guys doing this? Are you guys doing this? Hey, this worked really well for us. Hey, I've got a situation with this student and this is what's going on. Have you ever seen that before? Yeah, we sure did. Here's how I handled it, and it worked well for us. Or it didn't work very well. Maybe try this instead. And I don't just have those conversations with those guys because that's where my kids go. They're 7 minutes down the road from us. The school that's 8 minutes up the road from us, the opposite direction. Guess what? We have those same conversations. Guess what? In the summertime, all those guys come here with us to train, and we do active shooter stuff where we're all on the same page. We work together all the time. We've met at the judge's office, who asked us to come over and all get together and start talking about how we were handling some of these juvenile cases and the different aspects that the district needed for these cases to go through, and things like that. And we work together. So when we talk about our community, we're not even just talking about our isolated community at that one town or that one district. We look at it as in East Texas, we're a community. We have an East Texas school safety task force. And I can't remember how many different school districts are represented in towns in that, but it covers an area of probably 200 or plus square miles of school districts and law enforcement officials, from cities to counties to the ISD departments to FBI. The FBI is a part of that. Our TAG in Smith County and the interoperation, that's a tactical group there, all work together and disseminate information if there's an active threat. Anytime something pops up on social media, we'll get emails and email threads from everything from what the FBI is seeing to what the gang units are seeing to what's going on at their school districts. And anyone who has any information different can put that in, and we can just look at all of it immediately and start to disseminate that type of information amongst that whole group. So we consider this whole East Texas area a community, not just our individual schools.
And I mean, those regional partnerships are absolutely essential, because I think something that a lot of people don't realize is when you look at the 25 highest casualty school shootings back to the 1960s, that 20 of those occurred in communities with less than 50,000 people. And so these are your mass fatality and mass casualty incidents at schools are most often in your smallest communities. And the response to that small community in the immediate minutes, in the hour after, and then in the days after is going to depend on all of those other communities in the area coming there. And I mean, if you were down in Uvalde before the shooting there, you probably never would have thought we need to do a joint exercise with units and resources from San Antonio.
Oh, exactly. But that's the thing. You look at Uvalde, and I mentioned, right, the mass majority of schools fall under that category of a class 3A or a class 4A. Uvalde in 2022 had 1,241 students in their high school from 9 through 12. All right, that's right there. It's a 3A, 4A school. I've been to Uvalde many times growing up here, played them in sports, played them in things like that. And I can't say for a fact, but I have heard it said that there, prior to that school year, when they had their safety meeting, just as many other districts around Texas, I've heard it hundreds of times. Well, we're going to do this, but don't worry, folks. This is such and such. It'll never happen here. This is little old such and such. It'll never happen here. We're just a little farming community. Nothing like that'll ever happen here. So just watch this quick video and we'll call it good.
Well, I mean,
and unfortunately, that's not good enough.
No, I mean, this is something I haven't discussed on the podcast previously, but I think we're past the statutes of limitations on this. I had an invite in the state of Georgia to present at their school safety conference, which was the summer a year ago. Mm-hmm. And at the end, when they got to the final schedule, I was going to do a presentation on the characteristics and history of school shootings in the state of Georgia and nationally, with a focus on it's mostly in these under-resourced rural schools. And my presentation ended up getting bumped off the schedule to have somebody from a federal agency do something about a profiling study that they had put out.
Sure.
About 3
Happens
months,
all the time.
About 3 months after that presentation was canceled, there was a shooting at Appalachia High School in Georgia in a small under-resourced community that clearly was having a lot of communication and coordination issues with the other school districts in that region. So It is
I
so
remember.
important, yeah, not to gloss over the need for inter-community coordination and your community working with many more partners than you ever imagined that you would need to in your monthly or biannual or annual meetings.
Oh, absolutely. And that really leads us into where we're at with a Guardian program. And the what's funny is I listened to the Coptimizer podcast that you did, and what's hilarious, even though I'm the program director for a Guardian program, arming staff right in
Yeah, can you
schools.
take a moment just describe what the Guardian program is in Texas before you get into what you're doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually what I was leading into was doing that, and I was going to say I agreed with the majority of what you guys were saying. As a general rule, I wouldn't want to arm staff. It sounds way more things against it, as you said in that podcast, there are so many negatives to it. It could add to the threat. You don't know what level of training you've got, and there's no standard behind it. And here is why we are where we are. In 2023, the Texas House Bill 3 was put into effect, okay, in September of 2023. And in Section 10 of House Bill 3 for the state of Texas, it says that armed security officer is required at every district, um, that or at every campus that falls within a school district in the state of Texas. So at least one armed security officer has to be present during regular school hours at each district campus. So what that has led to is a couple of different options that you have to meet this mandate that came out when House Bill 3 was put in place in September of 2023. You can either establish an ISD police department like we have here, and a lot of schools in Texas have gone that route. They've established an ISD police department. And the way that works is a school board being an elective governing body. All right. In our Texas Constitution, they basically reserve the right to have a police agency, a police force, all right, at their disposal, as any governing body would, a municipality in a local city. So a municipal police department is in, their boss is not the chief, it's the city manager or the city council who they work for. That's who they're actually employed by, is that elected governing body. All right. The sheriff, who is an elected official in the state of Texas, all right, has his deputies, his sheriff's office of deputies, that is his police force. It to operate within that jurisdiction, in that governing body's jurisdiction. A school district is a governing body that actually has a larger jurisdiction in most cases than most municipalities do. All right, because they're going to be outside, possibly crossing county lines, possibly crossing into, even where you have two school districts that cross, where you have kind of joint custody of area there, where kids could go to one or the other. And we don't see that as much anymore because they're redrawing most of the lines. But a school district in itself is a large area. All right. And everybody that's a taxpayer in that area pays tax to the school district. That's who their school taxes go to. And with that, they have elected officials that have determined what goes on with education. And now they have the ability to have a police force. So our jurisdiction is actually those lines. We don't look at city limits or county lines. Our jurisdiction as ISD police officers is the school district itself. And we have jurisdiction for anything, law enforcement related, anywhere within that. All right. So you have ISD police officers, you have school resource officers. Okay, a school resource officer, like I said earlier, is that officer that's on loan from either a sheriff's office or a municipality. They come into a contract. The police department or sheriff's office will come into a contract with the school district. All right, and what the rate the school district's going to pay that department to give them an officer for a certain amount of time, whatever they set, right? and then he's on loan to them. That's his appointed place of duty as far as that department is concerned. They'll be under an MOU or something as far as that goes, as far as what type of jurisdiction that he has now within that school district, as opposed to just the agency that he was working with, which can kind of get cloudy and can kind of be hard to determine at times. And the biggest downside to the SRO model and why it's not as effective is because 9 times out of 10, these guys are on loan for a year. They do their time at the school. It's either a young guy or, like I said, the retired on duty guy.
So they're not getting socialized and embedded and familiar with that school. I mean, you think about it, when you're a freshman going into high school, which everybody can remember, it takes you half the year before you remember every hallway, all the shortcuts around campus, a bunch of the teachers' names. Like, that takes a while. So, I mean, embedding yourself into the school community to the point where first, the campus inside and out, all the staff members. So when you hear a kid is choking in Miss Brown's classroom, you don't have to look at your directory and figure out, oh, that's East Hallway, floor 2. You just know where it is.
Right.
And then ultimately, the kids also all know your name, so that if they're having a problem, whether it's a school shooting threat or a gang issue or a drug issue or an abuse issue or any of the things that might come to the attention of an adult or a police officer in the school, the kids are not going to build that rapport and level of trust with you if you're just there half a year, 1 year, or on a swing overtime shift whenever there's an extra patrol car in the district.
In some of the larger areas, you talk about Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, some of these big areas like that. San Antonio ISD, I mean, I think their ISD department has 300 plus officers or something like that. I mean, they're enormous. We have 4. Our local city municipality, I think they may have 20 sworn, if that, officers there. The agency that I worked for before, we used to laugh because we were an interstate agency, so we were only in our city limits, only had about 5,500 people in the city limit. So we used to always laugh and say we're a city of 55 servicing 45,000, because there's so many small communities around there on the interstate and where we were that we directly serviced, but we were only allotted enough officers for the 5,500 people in the town. So we were always, running ragged over there. But you run into that constantly. And so, like you said, what you get is you get these guys who are coming over on loan. And a lot of times what these departments do is it'll be the young guy who's, maybe worked for a year or two on the streets, and he needs to go get some variety, or he needs to maybe calm down a little bit or be humbled. So he goes and does a year at the school before he can come back. Well, he's looking at the future. He's hoping to get back on patrol. He can't wait to get back on the streets, or he's training for SWAT tryouts or whatever it might be. He's not invested in those students. He's not invested in school safety. He's there to do his job, and he will, and he's going to. But other than that, he's a warm body carrying a gun.
Well,
right?
And with that, I mean, what I've seen looking at these incidents back to the 1960s is there are one of the most common categories for any type of shooting at a school is an accidental discharge. Mm-hmm. And many of those involve armed security or school resource officers at the school. And in almost all of those cases, it's a matter of boredom, or it's a matter of, I'm sure you experienced this in the military, you're waiting for Osama bin Laden to come over that barricade, and you are ready to go. So there have been officers practicing quick draws in their office, because the one thing in their mind is that I've got to be ready, because today might be the day that bad guy is going to be here. So every day I'm going to practice quick draws. Or somebody who's just bored to the point where they're standing around the same door, looking out the same door at the same field, at the same tree every day. And because there's nothing stimulating their mind, they're bumping their gun in and out of the holster the entire day, and they end up firing. And I think that comes back to...
Or they end up bumping something else, and we end up with officers in the news, giving a bad name to schools officers who can't keep their hands either off of students or teachers and get into bad relationships with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
and that comes down to
the
the person being are they a part of that community who's invested in the community, who knows every single person in that school building? Or is it somebody who's there just for one purpose that they may or may not be able to even accomplish given that opportunity?
Right. And so you've got a multifaceted, I don't want to call it a problem, but it's a problem. You've got a multifaceted problem now that's been presented to schools in the state of Texas, and that is we have a mandate that we have to meet. Okay, we have to put this armed personnel on school campuses. So what do? What do you get? Do you contract with the local guys? Do you set up your own ISD? Some schools just aren't equipped. They're not capable to do that right now. They don't have the know-how. They don't have someone there that's willing to do it, because the first thing you got to have is somebody that's willing to step up and be like, hey, guess what? I've never done it before, but I'll be a police chief for an ISD department. Well, what does that entail? Oh, gosh. Well, we don't know. We're in education. What does that entail? And this guy is stepping in going, well, I'm not real sure. I know, it's what it does out here. But and the downside of that is there's not a lot of information about school-based law enforcement. To be a school-based law enforcement officer, a certified school-based law enforcement officer, you have to attend one 20-hour course on school-based law enforcement and one active shooter course. And you get a certificate. You're now a school-based law enforcement officer in the state of Texas. I'm not knocking those courses. The 4061 SBLE course done by the Texas School Safety Center is a very informative, and it's a must-have course when you get into working in a school. But we could do so much more. And so
it would be like letting people in the military if you take 3 days of training and then you get dropped into a combat zone.
Yeah, we're looking at Vietnam draft style implementation here into something, and what we've done is we like you said, we're taking that Vietnam draft style approach to protecting our most prized possessions in life. How does that even make sense? Okay, so with that, getting back to the problem, we have a mandate we have to meet here in Texas. With that, you can do it one of those three ways, okay? Either with the ISD police department, you can do contracted services with the SROs, all right, or you can file what's called a good cause exception, which means, per definition, that you are basically unable to comply with the mandate due to the availability of funding or personnel who would qualify to serve as a security officer described by the definitions that the code or the mandate sets forth. In that case, you can meet the mandate by employing a school marshal, which is a program that is regulated by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, that is an 80-hour training course, and it's a basically armed security officer in the school who's uniformed. His uniform will say marshal somewhere on it. He's carrying a sidearm. He has limited arrest powers. He's not a peace officer. He's just a school district employee who has been through marshal training. All right. You can only go get this training through the Texas Department of Public Safety. You have to go through the course. There's a cost associated with it. You have the liability cost that goes into having someone like that employed. As far as the Commission on Law Enforcement goes, you have to meet their standards and regulations as far as annual qualifications, the oversight, different things like that come in with a marshal. Or what they call the guardian option, which is option number 2. And that is a school district employee or person with whom the district contracts who, A, has completed school safety training provided by a qualified handgun instructor, certified in school safety under the government code, and B, who carries a handgun on school premises in accordance with written regulations or written authorization from the district. So now you can have somebody who's got an LTC, license to carry, who's given written authorization from the school district to carry on campus. and that can meet your good cause exception as far as the mandate for House Bill 3. Here is why this becomes the most popular choice. That person already works for your school district. The Texas School Safety Certification is a 2-day, 16-hour course that's done by licensed instructors, the Department of Public Safety. They're actually licensed to carry instructors who have gotten the additional school safety certificate. They don't necessarily work in school safety. They don't necessarily work even in school districts or in any type of safety role, because any citizen can be a licensed to carry instructor if they go through the DPS's course and get certified. So now they can also go be a certified school safety instructor if they do that additional step there and pay the fee for the license. All right, so minimum 16 hours of training, license to carry, and written permission, and we can put this person on our campus. A horrible option as far as safety is concerned. But if you're a superintendent of a rural school district and you're crunching numbers and you're counting beans every year to try to figure out how you're going to keep the science teacher this year, because you know those kids are getting tested next year by the state and your funding is going to be dictated by the testing. And if you can't pay them another $5,000 this year, they're gone and you're not sure if you can get another one. How do you justify bringing on 4 peace officers and salaries and patrol vehicles and benefits packages when you can just take those 4 people that already work for the school district? You're already paying their salaries. Maybe give them a little stipend, or just see who has the heart to volunteer and do it anyway. Because most places in Texas, you're going to find that they'll do it for free.
And it's interesting that, this program, and I like how you framed it, that is it the best public safety solution? No. But are you meeting a state mandate in the best way possible? And that's something that gets lost in so many of the school security discussions, is that a lot of these things that are imperfect or even potentially harmful solutions are not the decisions that the school districts are making. They are something that came out of the state legislature. Here in Florida, there was a sweeping school safety bill passed only 6 weeks after the shooting in Parkland. If there's 6 weeks that a bill gets through, it means you have not done any serious analysis of the impact. You have not had input from all your key stakeholders. You've not looked at all the implications of the program. And
you want to look at House Bill 3. Okay. Remember, I said it took effect in September of 2023. All right, which was I believe it was the 86th legislature session. Okay, which was legislature in Texas meets every 2 years during the summer. They usually get together like end of February, 1st of March, and then it goes all the way through the end of August. And most bills will take effect there like September 1, right? Like this one did. So 2023 is 1 year to the day from what shooting?
Yeah.
May of 2022 was the shooting in Uvalde. This bill is what I would say, and I'm not knocking my legislatures or anything like that, but in my opinion, it plays as a knee-jerk reaction, not necessarily as thought out as it could have been, to Uvalde and our public, our citizens in Texas outcry for a solution. So they provided a solution. I feel it could have been better thought out. So when I was hired in Mineola and took over and is put in place to be the director of this Guardian program, at the time, we did not have, we have 4 campuses spread out in our small district. we only had 3 officers, and at the time they only had 2 when I was hired. So I was hired as an additional officer, but we still didn't have enough police officers to meet the mandate. So our Guardian program was the supplement to meet the mandate. We had to file a good cause exception also to use our Guardians to meet the mandate. But what we found was not only was it a way to meet the mandate, but it was really the only answer, if done correctly, to actually having a chance to stop a violent act like a school shooter from not from it happening. Understand the preparation and pre-planning that goes into preventative measures is not what we're talking about. I'm talking about response alone. Once a person has already made their way in and decided this is what they're going to do and commits that act, you've done the research, and if people want to see it, your database is the place to go to find these answers, because the FBI reports and things like that, I have every one of them going all the way back to 2014, 12, when they first started doing that. Back then it looked like a pamphlet. Now it's a full out, report every year. Yeah, I'm sure because you've done the research too. But I think they used to combine 4 or 5 years at a time when they did one of these. The FBI active shooter report was from 2012 to 2016. Like now we get one every year that's 3 or 4 times the size of the old ones that literally were a few pages of some numbers that no one paid attention to. But when you look at the statistics, they talk about the average law enforcement response time to a shooting, and the FBI will boast that that's 3 minutes nationwide. Yeah, okay. That's maybe 3 minutes from the dispatched call, not from the activation of an incident. Having worked patrol, a 3-minute response time is great, right? But that I can only get there 3 minutes after my dispatcher reaches out and says, "Hey, go do this thing." That doesn't tell me how long she spent on the phone call with the individual who was reporting the incident before she put it out over the radio, which to me, a quick time for that is probably no less than 60 seconds. So now we're 4 seconds or 4 minutes in to that response time. And once my 3 minute response time stops the moment I pull onto the property and I check, hey, I'm 1023, which means I'm on site. I'm out. I'm on show me on site, show me on location, show me out. Okay. I have not done anything as far as responding to the threat. I responded to the property and I got there in 3 minutes. So if we add the phone call in, we're now 4 minutes in. Okay. I've just gotten to the property. By the time I get out, kit up, grab a rifle, get oriented to the situation, figure out what's going on, find a breach point into the school, make my way into the school, hunt down and find the shooter. All right. And let's just use Nashville as an example, because we got some great body-worn footage out of that tragedy. And I call it a tragedy because every one of these is a tragedy. And as tragic as it is, what I tell my guardians when we look at these incidents to train is understand the way we honor these sacrifices that were made during these tragedies is we use things like this footage as a gift that they left us to learn from.
Yeah, I think even before you get into Nashville, the even better example of that, which I'll put a link in the show notes, is from the Allen, Texas Outlet Mall.
Oh, great one.
Because,
yes.
That one, you've got the body camera starts, there's an officer in the parking lot talking to some citizens, and then you get the call over the radio for the active shooter in the mall. And this outlet mall is so large that there's a shooting taking place. And the officer in the mall is far enough that he can't even hear the shots from the other side of it. But he immediately clicks that he's there and he's responding. And I think that video is so important because they don't cut the timestamps or any of the video.
No.
And you hear him say, "I'm on the scene." That would pump, into your stats. Wait, we had a 0-second response time to this incident.
Yeah.
And then he grabs his rifle from the back of the car and starts running towards where it's going on. And it is an incredible video because for about 5 minutes, he sprints, the adrenaline dump hits, he slows to a trot, he hears some more gunshots, the adrenaline hits, he's running again. The adrenaline dump happens, he slows to a trot, it happens again, goes through 3
Yeah,
cycles of that. He runs for almost 5.5 minutes across
absolutely.
this giant outlet mall before he finally gets to the location where it's happening. But that's where, unless you have a nuanced understanding of these incidents, you would see
Right.
0 second response time, you'd see this or that.
Hmm.
But that's the same as your mega school campuses, your
Oh,
shared school
absolutely.
campuses. Just because
Well,
somebody
or your
checked in,
rural campuses like ours. We only have 4 campuses. We've got only, close to 2,000 students and staff located on a 150-acre property in rural East Texas with a police department that's undermanned, overworked, already handling calls and situations that are going on in this town, a county sheriff's office that's overmanned, understaffed, and handling, they may have 2 or 3 deputies covering 150 square miles. They may be 20 minutes down the road. Their closest response to get here, we have an SRT, or what you would refer to as a special response team or SWAT team with our county. We actually are lucky that we do have one right there. They've got a 45-minute call window. That's a fast call out for a rural county. Any SWAT team here in Texas, unless you're in a metropolitan area, and even a lot of the metropolitan call outs are only a half hour. It's going to be a half hour before you get a response team that, at that level. So you've got the guys on the ground. And like we said, a 3-minute response is not what the statistic makes it look like. That's a 3-minute response to the scene, to the location, not to the shooter. And if we start breaking down these incidents, which I know your team has done in great depth, you know that if that shooter is allowed to continue out his plan within 5 minutes, the average amount of mass casualty will occur in that first 5 minutes of the shooting. So if they receive no distraction, isolation, or neutralization during that first 5 minutes, then the incident is going to be as bad as it could have been.
yeah, I think that's lost. That's certainly lost in the FBI and the Secret Service analysis. I mean, when you take the broader perspective, there are about 230 deliberately planned attacks that have happened at schools since the 1960s that I've studied. And about 60% of those incidents started and ended in the same room without anyone else being involved. So that's your most common scenario is a student pulls a gun out of their backpack, opens fire in the classroom, and commits suicide within the first minute or so after the first shot that they fired. And it's not based on an intervention of anyone else. And sadly, like that's what happened at Antioch High School in Tennessee earlier this year. That's what happened at Abundant Christian Life School in Madison, Wisconsin. The girl had 2 pistols in her backpack.
Yeah.
And she actually never even fired the second gun. She fired with the first one and killed herself before the first officers got dispatched. Yeah.
The catch-22 to programs like this, right, is you hear people say, well, there's no validation, there's no way to say that this works, there's no, but we can say that alert works or that this works. And I would argue and say, well, no, alert's been used. I don't know that it's worked per se, because there's been a lot more instances that it hasn't worked than it did, but it has been used. But again, I don't know that I could argue the validation there. So it's hard to find a way to say, well, this program works, right? Something that like this with guardians, when done right, can work. And I would say this, that the only way I know to do that is through the same way that we use stress and training, and that's through time. So the closest thing that I can offer for validation to if it could work would be we actually at our school district, we experienced a active shooter event in January. Luckily, it was a false alarm. But there was an incident across the road from our maintenance facility that was what we eventually found out to be a older vehicle that had a bad catalytic converter and was backfiring. There was a off-duty police officer that lived on the road next to where it happened who literally came out and jumped in his vehicle to respond because it was everyone in the area thought it was a drive-by shooting. At the school, of course, we didn't know that. We had an employee who came over our radio system and just started yelling, shots fired, shots fired. We have gunfire. We got no more information. So we immediately initiated our standard response protocol lockdown for the high school, which is the closest to where the employee that came over the radio worked. And our officer team went into response mode, and as well did our guardians. We work on a 100% anonymity program as far as our guardians are concerned. If you learn their identity, we keep anyone who gets involved with them and learns their identity under non-disclosure agreement. You cannot disclose their identity. They cannot disclose their identity. If they do, they'll be removed from the program. There are several aspects like that, so no one knows who they are. We did not have a single handgun that was drawn, nobody unholstered. But in talking about breaking down the time, from the time that somebody came over the radio and said shots fired on our radio, which we have a time stamp of, we had our high school staff and students in lockdown in under 2 minutes, in full lockdown. And we had armed staff, had already had a perimeter set, interior and exterior, armed perimeter for security at the high school, because we did not, obviously there was no shooter to locate, even though we did a sweep all the way through the campus and everything else. And we had active teams of armed staff sweeping through additional buildings on campus until we found out that it was off campus. All of that was done in less than 90 seconds from the initial radio call. Do I know if we could have stopped somebody? Man, the best I can do is simulation training, and I know that how we do in that. But as far as real world as it gets, without having to actually swap gunfire and getting a OK Corral situation in a hallway, thank God we didn't. But all I can say is our officers actually made it to the scene of the 911 call at the apartment complex before the 911 call came out through dispatch to other officers in town. We were actually already on scene. The school officers were, because we went and found what was going on. And we were on scene getting information from witnesses who saw the vehicle before the dispatch ever came out over the radio at the local municipality.
Yeah, and then with that, once you had that information, I assume you were able to then end the lockdown really quickly, be able to get a message out to parents, and then from there, you take what could have been a really traumatic incident where the students, they don't know what's going on.
Not only that, but our superintendent was able to communicate with parents. Our first radio, and David, remind me, I'll share, I have an after action report written up on this that you can, I'll share with you. But they got the first communication out to parents. I think it was in 12 minutes of all of this kicking off. We had our first communication with parents going out. It was real time. The superintendent was on the ground at the high school, pushing real time information out directly from us. He was working with our chief, who went into an IC role and coordinating between us and the local municipality. Our officers that were on scene first to the actual call, not just with the lockdown, but had said, hey, we got security in place, and rolled out to go help the city try to figure out what was going on. They actually had the description of the car pushed out. They had that vehicle stopped on the roadside in under 10 minutes. They found the vehicle, had it stopped, had the guy, had questioned the guy, searched the vehicle. He told him what was going on, had him drive the vehicle, test it. Sure enough, figured out that's what was going on. We said, hey, there's no threat. The whole thing, we come out of lockdown. We were only in lockdown for about 10 minutes total. We came down and we downgraded to a secure, which would be like a lockout where all the, nobody can come in, but inside the school, everybody went back to class as normal. So the kids didn't know anything other than, hey, we're good. Everything's taken care of. We're safe again. They go back to class. And then,
And I want to foot stomp that point because
yeah,
that gets glossed over in so much training and planning. Is there are all the procedures for starting a lockdown. Very few people give attention to when you lift your lockdown.
right.
And the minute you can lift the lockdown is when all of the students stop thinking that they're about to die in their classroom. And I mean, that's something that gets missed in all kinds of public safety activities. Like we closed
Even in,
we
David,
closed the
even in
highway.
drills,
We
even
closed
in
the highway
drills.
for an accident. Wait a second. We're actually stopping a major interstate. Like,
Yeah,
let's have the clock ticking to get this rolling again. We
absolutely.
just shut the water down to an apartment building. Let's have a clock in our mind for how many people are being impacted by this right now. And as soon as we have a problem isolated, let's get the power and the water back on. So I think that is something that's so important that it's in your after action report. And then also that people realize you need to train and prepare and exercise for lifting the lockdown and
Yes.
your determinants for doing that. Now we've gone over on time, so I just have one more question for you here before we get out on this. And I caveating this again with, you know, this Guardian program is something that is meeting a state mandate that nobody who's implementing it had any input on what that state mandate was going to be.
Right.
I think that the danger of the school guardian, whether it's in Texas or the armed teachers in other parts of the country, is that you're putting that person into an impossible situation where they're probably going to get blamed for doing the wrong thing, regardless of what happens. That the most common scenario for a planned attack would be the teacher's at the chalkboard
Mhm.
and somebody pulls a gun from a backpack in the
Absolutely.
classroom. That teacher, if they fire into the classroom, is making a mistake, potentially hitting someone else. If they don't shoot,
Sure.
they're the armed guardian. They're not
Yep.
taking the appropriate action. Say it's a shooting in the hallway. If they leave their class, they're making a mistake. If they stay in their class, they're making a mistake. And the real world example of this, which is, about 90 minutes west of you, is at Wilmer Hutchins High School in
Mhm.
Dallas. They had the second shooting on campus 2 years in a row. And this was a student who was let in through a side door, and then he committed a targeted shooting in the hallway that hit some bystander students also. Dallas ISD has said, we're going to put an armed guardian at every single door to this campus. Well, what happens when somebody comes to that door? Is the guardian just supposed to shoot anybody who surprises them at the door? Anybody that they see coming through an unlocked door? Because
Sure.
if it's a planned attack, they are going to be wrong if they didn't shoot. If it's not,
Right.
they're going to be wrong for shooting.
Well,
We're
and
putting people in such a hard situation.
it's an no, it's not a hard situation. A hard situation is, when somebody cuts you off at the gas pump and you get out and you have a brief verbal confrontation there, keeping that from becoming physical. This is an impossible situation where you're putting this not just safety but life and death aspect of innocent children in the hands of someone who has volunteered to step up and say, I'm gonna hold the line. I am going to be the deterrent that hopefully keeps that evil from getting to these children. And what we've done with this mandate is we've created a likely situation, because it's also impossible for a lot of districts to meet financially or logistically, whatever it might be, to meet that mandate with professionals who, let's be honest, may or may not be trained to handle it, even though they do have a badge. Because you and I both know not every police officer is capable of being an active attack expert or an active shooter expert or a tactician or making those decisions under intense stress that people you cannot fathom. It's unfathomable, the amount of stress and what the body does and reacts to during those situations. I can tell you firsthand from in on our side as law enforcement in January when we had the false alarm, we knew within about 3 to 4 minutes, okay, about 4 minutes roughly, uh, for that first 4 minutes, we thought we had a shooting until we were able to confirm without a doubt that it was a false alarm. We reacted like we had a shooting. And getting the firsthand feedback from some of the other officers, from some of the guardians that are in our program, the amount of stress, what their brains started to do, their OODA loop going into overdrive, right? Them having to navigate things like using keys, dialing phones, changing the channel on their radio, things they knew to do but forgot to do because of the amount of stress that overtook their. But you can't fathom the amount of stress. So it's an impossible situation that we're putting these people into, and we're asking them to be a part of. And just to meet the mandate is doing it with little to no training whatsoever. So that takes me into what we have done and what we're going, and the reason we're coming down to speak in San Antonio this summer at the school safety conference is because our program, what we've done is we've established a framework, so to speak, of hopefully how to do that with some success and keep these individuals who are willing to jump on board and be that person trained and proficient in their training, keep them frequent in their reality-based simulations. As far as training, we train regularly in simulated scenarios, keep them under stress in training, able to respond. And it's targeted, it's focused, because I don't need school staff members that are armed that know how to serve a warrant like a SWAT team does. I need them to know how to stop an active shooter. So I don't have to teach them all the things I would have to train a SWAT team to do. I just need to teach them what is important for stopping an active shooter. That's use of force. Like I said, it was a huge success to me when I did not have a single program member under active threat draw their firearm, because there was no need to, and they've been trained not to. When law enforcement started to show up and they were able to identify themselves, and we had no issue whatsoever with them interacting with other law enforcement, because we train regularly with other law enforcement, not just our ISD officers, local officers, county officers, state troopers come and train with us. Other agencies come and train with us, and we throw our guardians right into the mix with all of them and tell them, you better learn how to interact with these guys. And we have protocols to follow. So what we've done is we've created a framework for how to actually put one of these programs together to make it successful and to mitigate those liabilities that we talked about. I know you guys talked about in the other podcast, to keep one of these programs from becoming more of a threat than actually having nothing in place. But instead, they become a force multiplier for my team. And they become one of the only chances at an actual response for stopping an attacker in that first 5 minutes. Because like I said, there's 4 of us. There's 150 acres, 3 campuses on 150 acres. Our other campus is across town. It's a 5-minute drive to get there. So the only chance they have is the one officer and his team of guardians that he's got over there at his disposal, who train with him regularly and interact regularly with law enforcement, that can actually have a chance of getting to that attacker if and when, because that's a mentality that you have to have. It's not, well, if that ever happens. No, it's when that happens here, this is how we will react. And if you don't have that mentality, then you're setting yourself, your team, your community up for failure, because you're not actually preparing for the worst to happen. You're checking a box. And so the framework that we've put together is what we're going down to present on, and how we've found the best practices to be to do this the right way, where you actually have capable individuals stepping into that role. tested to the highest level possible without actually putting them in a gunfight. And if anyone really wants to argue that, I would say out of the however many veterans that we have now from our military community, how many of them actually saw combat? Were they combat ineffective because they never saw combat? So our military right now, since we're not in an active combat, are we combat ineffective because they're not being deployed regularly to combat? Or are we pretty confident that if we have to send them in, they're going to get the job done? Why are we confident that if we have to send them in, we're going to get the job done? Well, it's because they have standard operating procedures that are based on real world information that has been translated into real time training that's done consistently, it's done frequently, and it's updated and progressed as information comes in to provide the best response possible. And that's what we do with our program. They operate on a 12-month training schedule. They're broken into teams. Every week of the month, there's a different team of Guardians out training. They stay frequent, they stay current, they stay consistent, and they train more than any law enforcement office that I know of in this area. And they train specifically for this one purpose.
I think that that's the perfect place to end this. You laid out the template and what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I'm going to put your contact info in the show notes. If there's anyone else who's operating a school-based police department, a guardian program, an armed teacher program, they'll have your information if they want to contact you and discuss this.
Feel free. We've got on our website, we've got a guardian page it's very informational. There's a link, and once this podcast is up, I'll provide the link on our page as well to this podcast. Our School Safety Center podcast is on there, as well as a breakdown kind of all of our just the way that we look at the program on our guardians, and I'll send you that if I hadn't already done it, David, here in a minute, as far as a link to that webpage. But feel free to put that on there as well. And again, I get calls every single week from multiple chiefs, school district superintendents who reach out, who have either seen that podcast or just been recommended to us to get this information, which is why we're going to this San Antonio this summer to try to get it put out. But people that just want answers because their school district has decided to go with guardians and they don't know what to do. And so that's where we're at.
Thanks for being real in your assessment of the legislation, in your assessment of the limitations and advantages of programs like this, your perspective on school policing. This was Officer Seth Capps. He's the Guardian Program Director for Mineola ISD in the very large, very diverse state of Texas. Thank you for listening. Thanks for your time, Seth.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.